The heat in the one-room apartment in the heart of Benin City was a physical presence, a thick, humid weight that seemed to trap the scent of kerosene and burning palm oil within the cracked walls. Isoken stood over a small camping gas burner, her wrapper tucked tightly above her chest, fanning her face with a piece of cardboard. Her feet ached, a dull, throbbing reminder of the 10 hours she had just spent standing at the hair salon, followed by 3 hours of hawking her homemade spice blend at the new Benin market. But as she looked toward the small wooden desk in the corner, the fatigue in her bones softened into a quiet, fierce pride. There sat Osas. The light from a single rechargeable lantern cast a halo around his head as he leaned over his thick textbooks. He was hunched, his lean frame tensed with the effort of concentration, his brow furrowed as he scribbled notes for his MBA entrance exams. Isoke moved silently, careful not to let her slippers click against the linoleum floor. She knew that in that small corner, the future was being written. She wasn't just cooking dinner, she was fueling a dream. "Osas, come and eat," she whispered, placing a plate of steaming starch and owo soup on the edge of the desk. Osas didn't look up immediately. His eyes remained fixed on a complex formula. "Just a minute is okay. If I don't master this module tonight, the preparatory classes will be a waste of money." Isoken felt a small pang in her chest. She knew exactly how much those classes cost. It was the money she had been saving for a new industrial sewing machine, the one that would have allowed her to take on more lucrative tailoring commissions. She had let that dream go without a second thought the moment Osas mentioned the MBA. She saw the potential in him, the sharp intelligence, the hunger for a life beyond the dust of the bypass. If he rose, they both rose. That was the unspoken covenant of their marriage. Isoken sat on the edge of their thin mattress, watching him eat. He ate quickly, mechanically, his mind still halfway inside his books. In those days, Osas was different. When he finally finished, he reached out and took Isoken's hand. His palms were rough and his nails were beaten down from stress, but his grip was steady. "I'm going to get us out of here, Isoke," he promised, his voice low and raspy. "I see how hard you're working. Every extra shift you take, every market day you spend under that sun, I'm recording it all here," he tapped his chest. "Once I get this degree, once I get into those big firms in Lagos, you will never have to smell wood smoke or market dust again. I will wrap you in silk, I swear it." Isoken smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. At 24, her body was already beginning to change. The long hours of standing had led to a heaviness in her legs, and the cheap, starchy meals they relied on to save money had added a soft curve to her waist and a fullness to her face. She didn't mind. She felt like a vessel, holding all their hope within her. "Don't worry about me, Osasomwe," she said, using his full name as a prayer. "As long as God follows you, I am satisfied. My strength is your strength." The months that followed were a blur of grueling labor. Isoken took on a fourth job, cleaning the offices of a local bank before the sun rose. She would wake up at 4 a.m., leaving a flask of tea and boiled yams for Osas, and trek through the morning mists to save on transport fare. Her skin, once bright, grew dull from exhaustion, and her hands became calloused from the harsh detergents. But every time she felt her knees buckle, she pictured Osas in a boardroom wearing the fine suits she saw in the magazines at the salon. One evening, she returned home to find Osas staring blankly at a pile of past question papers. The lantern had died, and he was sitting in the dark. "I can't do it," he groaned, his head in his hands. "The competition for the scholarship is too high. Maybe I should just look for a teaching job. We are killing ourselves for a gamble." Isoken didn't hesitate. She went to the wardrobe, reached behind a stack of folded wrappers, and pulled out a small tied plastic bag. Inside were crumpled notes, naira she had hidden away one by one from her spice sales. "You are not gambling," she said firmly, pressing the money into his hand. "You are investing. Take this, use it for the registration of the second exam. I've already spoken to the woman in the cold room. She needs someone to help with deliveries at night. I can take the night shift. Osas looked at the money, then at his wife. In that moment, he saw her as his savior. He saw the sweat on her brow and the swelling in her ankles, and his eyes filled with tears. He pulled her into a tight embrace, burying his face in the crook of her neck that smelt of ginger and hard work. "You are too good for me, Isoke," he sobbed, brushing her hair. "Why do you believe in me this much?" "Because I know who you are," she whispered, her tears mingling with his. "You are the man who will change our family name. I am just the ground you are walking on to reach the top." In those early years, the struggle was their bond. They shared a single piece of meat at dinner, laughing as they debated who deserved the larger half. They dreamt out loud to the rhythm of the rain hitting their zinc roof. Isoken didn't feel fat or unattractive then. She felt powerful. She was the engine, the financier, the silent architect of a rising star. She poured everything she had, her youth, her beauty, her energy, into Osas, believing with every fiber of her being that the modern elegance he promised would be a sanctuary for them both. She didn't know then that the man she was building would eventually look at the tools she used to build him, the calloused hands, the tired eyes, the heavy frame, and find them shameful. She didn't know that once he reached the summit, he would find the ground he walked on to be too beneath him. For now, in the golden glow of the lantern, they were one. They were a team. And as Osas turned back to his books with renewed vigor, Isokin sat in the shadows, massaging her aching feet, satisfied of her lot. Isokin gave up her dreams to build his. She took the night shift so he could sleep, and she carried their future in her hands while her own strength was tested to the limit. We've all seen the spark in Osas's eyes, but is it a fire that will warm their home or a flame that will eventually burn the woman who lit it? Before we move into chapter 2, I want to hear from you. Like this video if you've ever been the silent engine behind someone else's success. Comment below. Do you think Osas will keep his promise to wrap her in silk, or is Isoken building a pedestal for a man who will eventually look down on her? Drop a Team Isoke in the comments to show your support for the woman who does the work no one sees. Subscribe and hit that notification bell. The climb to the top is about to get very steep, and the view from the summit isn't what anyone expected. Let's continue. The board is waiting, and Isoken is about to write the strategy of a lifetime. The move to Lagos was not the grand arrival Osas had imagined, but it was a beginning. They occupied a tiny, damp apartment in a bustling suburb where the noise of the city never truly slept. Osas had secured an entry-level analyst position at a mid-sized firm, a role that demanded long hours for a salary that barely covered their rent and the dry cleaning for the 3 high-quality shirts Isoken had insisted on buying him. While Osas spent his days trying to navigate the shark-infested waters of corporate politics, Isoken remained his silent engine. She had transitioned from hawking spices to supplying high-end restaurants with curated seasonings, working from their cramped kitchen until her fingers were stained yellow from turmeric and her eyes stung from grinding dried chilies. One evening, Osas returned home not with his usual restless energy, but with a crushing, hollow silence. He slumped onto their plastic sofa, his tie undone, staring at a thick stack of documents on the coffee table. The firm was competing for a massive infrastructure contract, and the junior analyst had been tasked with drafting the preliminary strategy. It was a make-or-break assignment. The board was looking for a fresh perspective, a voice that understood both the grit of the local market and the sophistication of global finance. "I'm out of my depth, Isoken," Osas admitted, his voice cracking as he leaned his head back against the wall. "The other guys, they went to private schools in London and Lagos. They speak the language of these boards like it's their mother tongue. I'm just a boy from the bypass trying to pretend I belong." Isoken wiped her hands on her apron and sat beside him. She didn't offer empty platitudes. Instead, she picked up the brief. Her formal education was limited compared to his, but her market education was doctoral level. She understood the flow of money, the hidden costs of logistics, and the psychology of the Nigerian consumer better than any textbook could teach. For years, she had watched the way power moved in the markets. She knew that people didn't buy services, they bought trust and solutions to their daily struggles. "Let us look at it together," she said softly. "You provide the corporate structure, and I will provide the soul." For the next week, the tiny apartment became a war room. While Osas slept for a few hours of fitful rest, Isoken stayed up under the flickering glow of a single bulb. She took his dry academic data and infused it with the reality of the streets. She pointed out where his projected costs were too low because he hadn't accounted for the informal taxes of the road, or where his marketing strategy was too leaky for a project meant to serve the mainland. She wrote in longhand, her neat script filling notebook after notebook, detailing a grassroots approach to corporate expansion that was both brilliant and daring. She ghostwrote his speeches, coaching him on how to deliver lines that sounded authoritative yet empathetic. She refined his slide deck, choosing words that cut through the fluff. She was the architect, laying the bricks of logic and the mortar of intuition, while Osas was the face of the building. "Isoken, this is genius," Osas whispered on the final night, reading the concluding summary she had written. "Where did you learn to think like this?" "I learnt it while I was selling spices to women who had to decide between buying seasoning or a bus fare, Osas," she replied, her voice tired but steady. "Economics isn't just numbers, it's people." The day of the presentation, Isoken spent her last bit of personal savings to ensure Osas looked the part. She polished his shoes until she could see her reflection in the leather and ironed his shirt with such precision that the creases could have cut paper. As he walked out the door, she tucked a small sachet of her finest ginger-scented oil into his pocket, a scent of home, a scent of the woman who had built him. Osas returned that night a changed man. He didn't just walk through the door, he conquered it. His eyes were wide, alight with a terrifying new fire. He told her how the board had fallen silent as he spoke, how the senior partner had stood up to shake his hand, and how they had called his strategy the most innovative piece of thinking the firm had seen in a decade. "They want me to present it to the chairman tomorrow," Osas said, pacing the room. "They kept asking me how I came up with the market-first logic. They said I have a rare gift for seeing the invisible threads of the economy." He didn't mention her. Not once during his retelling did he say "we." In the heat of the praise, the silent architect had already begun to fade into the background of his mind. Isoken felt a flicker of unease, a cold shadow passing over her heart, but she quickly suppressed it. She told herself that his victory was her victory. If the board noticed him, they were noticing the work of her hands. She prepared a special meal that night, a feast to celebrate his triumph, but Osas barely touched it. He was too busy on his phone, replying to emails from senior colleagues who had ignored him only 24 hours prior. "This is it, Isoken," he said, staring at his screen. "This is the door opening. I can feel it. Everything is about to change." Isoken watched him from the shadows of the kitchen, her body feeling heavier and more tired than usual. She had poured her mind into his career, just as she had poured her sweat into his education. She was happy for him, truly, but as she looked at the way he gripped his phone, like a shield between him and the room they shared, she realized that the man who had promised to wrap her in silk was already starting to look at the silk and not at the woman who had woven it. She had built the ladder for him, rung by rung, with her own hands. She just didn't realize yet that as he climbed higher, the view from the top wouldn't include the woman standing at the bottom, holding the ladder steady. The announcement of the partnership arrived with the clinical coldness of a formal email, yet its impact was seismic. For the firm, it was a strategic move to secure their most innovative mind. For Osas, it was the moment he officially shed his old skin. The promotion came with a signing bonus that looked like a telephone number, and a relocation package to a sprawling, minimalist villa in the manicured silence of old Ikuyi. Isoken watched the transition with a mixture of awe and a deepening quiet dread. She had packed their lives into boxes for the 10th time in a decade, but as they drove through the soaring gates of their new home, she realized this was the first time she didn't feel like she was moving with him. She felt like she was being dragged along behind a fast-moving vehicle. The mansion was a masterpiece of glass, white marble, and sharp, uncompromising angles. It was the kind of modern elegance Osas had obsessed over in magazines. Beautiful, expensive, and entirely devoid of warmth. On their first night, the echoes of their footsteps on the polished floors sounded like a series of small, sharp ruptures. Osas didn't walk through the rooms, he inspected them. He stood in the center of the double-height living room, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his tailored trousers, his gaze fixed on the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a pool illuminated by a cold blue light. It finally happened, Isuke. His voice was different. The raspy, hungry edge of the Benin City boy was gone, replaced by a smooth, curated baritone that sounded like it had been practiced in a mirror. No more dust, no more noise. We've arrived. Isoken walked toward him, her footsteps feeling heavy and clumsy against the pristine marble. She was wearing one of her comfortable cotton wrappers, her hair tied back in a simple scarf. In the reflection of the glass, she saw them both. Osas, looking like a silhouette from a high-fashion campaign, and herself, a soft, rounded shape that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. She reached out to touch his arm, but he shifted slightly, adjusting his watch, and her hand fell into empty air. "It's a lot of space for just two people," she whispered, her voice sounding small in the vastness. "I'll start setting up the kitchen tomorrow. I saw a perfect spot for my spice grinders." "No," Osas interrupted, his voice sharp. He turned to face her, and for the first time, Isoken saw the distance in his eyes. It wasn't just ambition anymore, it was a war. "The kitchen is for the chef we're hiring, Isoken. I don't want the house smelling like fermented locust beans and heavy spices. We have a certain image to maintain now. I'll be hosting partners here, international investors. We need refinement." The word refinement hung in the air like a slap. Isoken looked down at her hands, the same hands that had ground those spices to pay for his tuition, the same hands that had auto-written the very strategy that had earned him this house. "The spices built this home, Osas," she reminded him gently, trying to find the man who used to pray with her over a single piece of meat. "The spices got us through a season," he retorted, his eyes narrowing as he scanned her figure. "Look at this place, Isoken. It's clean, it's light, it's perfect." He stepped closer, his gaze lingering on the fullness of her waist, the soft curve of her jaw. "Don't you feel it? Don't you feel how different everything is? I feel like I've finally become the man I was always meant to be. And a man like that, he has to look the part. Everything around him has to match the aesthetic." He walked away toward the master suite, leaving Isoken standing alone in the center of the blue-lit room. She looked at her reflection again. She saw the mother wealth in her skin, the strength in her thick arms, and the abundance of a woman who had poured herself into another person until she was nearly empty. To her, her body was a trophy of survival and sacrifice. But in the cold blue light of the mansion, she realized that to Osas, it was a blemish on his new white marble world. That night, they lay in a bed that was large enough to fit 4 people. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, cool and crisp, but they felt like ice against Isoken's skin. Osas stayed on his side, his face illuminated by the glow of his phone, his thumb scrolling through social media profiles of Lagos's elite, the slim, the polished, the curated. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't whisper promises of silk. He was already wrapped in silk, and it seemed he had no more need for the weaver. Isoken lay awake, listening to the silence of the mansion. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a home at rest, it was the clinical silence of a gallery. She realized then that in the one-room apartment, they were a team because they had to be. In the struggle, her abundance was their insurance. But here, in the world of modern elegance, she was being repositioned as a relic. As the air conditioner hummed with a low, expensive drone, Isoken felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Osas had landed his big break, and in the process, he had broken something between them. He had finally reached the summit, and as he looked out over his new kingdom, he wasn't looking for his wife. He was looking for a trophy that would fit the pedestal he had built. She realized with a sinking heart that the man she had called Osasunwen was gone, and in his place, a stranger who valued the clarity of glass more than the depth of his soul. The transformation did not happen all at once. It arrived in increments, like the slow, steady cooling of a room once the fire has gone out. Osas began to wake earlier than ever, but not to study or to strategize over the notebooks Isoken had filled for him. Instead, he spent the pre-dawn hours in the mansion's private gym, a glass-walled sanctuary of chrome and black iron. Through the windows, Isoke would watch him from the kitchen, a silhouette of frantic energy against the rising sun. He ran on the treadmill until his face was gaunt, lifting weights until his muscles were knotted and tight, a physical manifestation of a man trying to outrun his own history. When he emerged, dripping with sweat and smelling of expensive supplements, he looked at her with a new kind of scrutiny. It was no longer the look of a husband who saw his sanctuary. It was the look of a manager assessing a faulty asset. One Tuesday evening, the kitchen was filled with the rich, deep aroma of banga soup. Isoken had spent the afternoon pounding the palm fruits, her arms rhythmic and strong, extracting the thick orange cream that had been Osas's favorite since the days they shared a single bowl. She had prepared it with fresh catfish and dried periwinkles, the steam rising in a fragrant cloud that, to her, represented the very essence of home. Osas walked in, still wearing his gym gear, and stopped at the threshold. He didn't inhale the scent with the usual groan of delight. Instead, he fanned the air with a look of pointed irritation. "It's okay. This is exactly what I was talking about," he said, his voice tight. "The smell is clinging to the curtains. It's heavy. It's oily. It's unrefined." Isoken paused, her serving spoon mid-air. "It's the banga you love, Osas. You haven't eaten properly all day. I made it to celebrate your successful board meeting." "I don't love it anymore," he snapped, walking over to the stove and staring into the pot as if it contained something primitive. "Do you have any idea how many calories are in this? How much saturated fat? I'm working 10 hours a day to build a global reputation, and you're in here trying to clog my arteries. My colleagues are talking about juice cleanses and keto diets, and my house smells like a roadside buka." He turned his gaze from the pot to Isoke. She was wearing a simple house dress, her skin glowing with the natural oils of her work. In his eyes, the mother wealth she carried was no longer a sign of abundance. It was a sign of a lack of discipline. "You should look in the mirror, Isoke," he said, his voice dropping to a cold, clinical whisper. "Really look. You are letting yourself go. While I'm out there becoming the best version of myself, you are staying stagnant. You are expanding while the world I'm building for us is getting leaner, sharper. It's embarrassing." Isoken felt the heat from the stove rise to her face, but it was nothing compared to the sting of his words. She looked down on her hands, still damp from the palm fruit. "This body raised the money that put you through school, Osas. This body worked 3 jobs so you could sit in an air-conditioned office. I am not stagnant. I am the reason you have the luxury of worrying about calories." "That was then," Osas shouted, his composure finally breaking. "Why do you insist on living in the past? That Isoke was a necessity. This Isoke is a liability. If you want to be the wife of a partner, you need to start acting and looking like one. No more of this heavy food. No more of this weight. I've signed us up for a private trainer. He starts Monday. And from now on, we eat clean. Salads, grilled fish, no oil. If you can't discipline your appetite, how can you expect me to respect your mind?" He walked out, leaving the banga soup to bubble and sigh on the stove. Isoke stood alone, the spoon still in her hand. She felt a sudden sharp hollowness in her chest. She looked at the soup, then at her own reflection in the polished black backsplash. She saw the woman she had always been, strong, soft, and full of life. But for the first time, she saw her through Osas's eyes, and the image felt like a caricature. Over the following weeks, the kitchen became a silent battlefield. The rich, spicy aromas of her heritage were replaced by the bland, sterile scent of steamed vegetables and lemon water. Osas monitored her plate with the intensity of a hawk, his eyes darting to her fork every time she took a bite. He spoke constantly of optimal performance and the executive silhouette, his conversation stripped of the humor and warmth that had once defined them. He began to buy her clothes that were 2 sizes too small, leaving them on the bed with a note, something to aim for. He stopped inviting her to Friday night drinks with his colleagues, claiming she would be bored by the conversation, though she knew the truth. He didn't want the buka smell or the plus-size reality of his past to tarnish the high-gloss finish of his present. The mirror had shifted. It was no longer a tool for Isoken to see her beauty. It had become a weapon Osas used to point out her perceived failures. She found herself standing before it late at night, touching the soft curve of her stomach, wondering when the man she loved had decided that her sacrifice was a blemish. She was still Isoken, satisfied with her lot, but she was beginning to realize that Osas was no longer satisfied with her. He was sculpting a new life, and in his vision there was no room for anything that wasn't thin, sharp, and entirely unrecognizable from the world that had birthed them. As Osas's muscles grew more defined and his jawline sharper, the heart of their home grew colder. The abundance Isoken had always offered, of food, of love, of spirit, was being starved out one meal at a time. The doorbell of the Ikoyi mansion didn't just ring, it chimed, a musical, high-pitched sound that announced the arrival of something expensive and uninvited. Isoken wiped her hands on a dry towel, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. She was wearing a loose-fitting linen kaftan, the kind Osas now called maternal. But it was the only thing that felt comfortable in a house that was beginning to feel like a showroom. At the door stood Esosa. She was a vision of neon spandex and calculated perfection, her body a masterpiece of low-carb discipline and high-priced sculpture. As a fitness influencer, Esosa's life was a curated feed of fitness goals, but to Isoke, she was simply the friend who had shared her secrets during the lean years in Benin City. Isoke, babe, Esosa squealed, stepping into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. She smelled of expensive citrus and a faint chemical tang of self-tanner. She looked Isoken up and down, her eyes lingering on the soft fullness of Isoken's face with a pity that felt like a needle prick. Osas called me. He's so worried about you, darling. He says you've stayed behind while he's moving forward. I told him, leave it to me. I'll help her find her waistline again. Isoken felt the familiar heat of embarrassment crawl up her neck. Osas called me about my weight? He's just concerned, honey. Success has a certain look, you know. Esosa patted Isoken's arm, but her eyes were already scanning the house, landing on the glass-walled gym where Osas was finishing his morning sets. Is that him? My God, he's transformed. He looks like a different man. For the next 3 weeks, Esosa became a permanent fixture in the house. She arrived every morning with green juices that tasted of grass and disappointment, and energy shots that made Isoken's heart race uncomfortably. She would lead Isoken through grueling workouts in the gym, shouting slogans about killing the fat and earning the luxury. But Isoken noticed that as soon as Osas entered the room, the intensity of the workout shifted. Esosa's voice would drop an octave, becoming a breathy, melodic hum. She would stop corrected Isoken's posture and instead begin demonstrating advanced stretches that highlighted the narrowness of her own waist and the length of her legs. She would toss her 30-inch straight weave over her shoulder, laughing at jokes Osas hadn't even finished telling.
"You're doing great, Isoken," Esosa would say, her eyes fixed entirely on Osas's reflection in the gym mirror. "But Osas, look at your form. Those lats are incredible. You must be the most disciplined partner at the farm. Most men get comfortable when they make money, but you're hungry for more." Osas, who had become increasingly stoic and cold toward Isoken, beamed under Isosa's praise. He started lingering in the gym, his late meetings mysteriously coinciding with the end of Isosa's training sessions. He began comparing them openly, his words disguised as motivation but delivered with the precision of a scalpel. "See how Esosa moves, Isoken," Osas said, watching Esosa sip water from a designer bottle. "There's no wasted energy. She's lean, she's focused. She represents the modern Nigerian woman. She's an asset to any room she enters. Don't you want to feel that light, that power?" Isoken sat on a weight bench, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her body aching with a fatigue that went deeper than muscle. She looked at her best friend and her husband, standing together in the bright clinical light of the gym. They looked like a set, two sharp, polished objects that belonged in this glass house. She, in her sweat-soaked clothes and her soft, abundant body, looked like an interloper. The flirting was subtle, a language of lingering glances and accidental touches that Isoken saw with painful clarity. Esosa would adjust Osas's grip on a barbell, her manicured fingers resting on his bicep a second too long. She would forget her gym bag in his car or send Osas progress photos of her own workouts that Osas would scroll through late at night, his face illuminated by the blue light of his phone, while Isoken lay silent beside him. "She's just trying to help me, Osas," Isoken said one night, her voice trembling. "But she's my friend. Why does she look at you like you're the prize she's training for?" Osas didn't even turn his head. "You're being insecure, Isoken. It's the weight. It messes with your hormones and your confidence. Esosa is a professional. She's the only one in this house who shares my vision for excellence. If you spend as much time working on your silhouette as you spend imagining conspiracies, we wouldn't have this problem." He rolled over, turning his back to her, a wall of cold muscle and hard ambition. Isoken lay in the dark, the scent of Esosa's citrus perfume lingering in the hallways of her home like a predatory cat. She realized then that she was being besieged on two fronts. Her husband was ashamed of her past, and her best friend was auditioning for her future. The silent architect was being demolished. Every time Esosa laughed at Osas's jokes, another brick of Isoken's confidence crumbled. Every time Osas looked at Esosa's slim frame with a hunger he no longer felt for his wife, the modern elegance they had built together felt more like a cage. Isoken was still satisfied with her lot, but she began to realize that her lot was being stolen piece by piece by a woman who offered Osas the one thing Isoken's sacrifice couldn't give him, a mirror that reflected only the man he wanted to be, with no memory of the man he used to be. The weeks bled into a month, the green juices became more bitter, and the silence in the master bedroom more profound. Isoken was losing weight, but she was also losing her spirit, shrinking under the combined gaze of a husband who saw her as a liability and a friend who saw her as an obstacle. The invitation sat on the obsidian console table like a golden gauntlet. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock with embossed gold lettering, announcing the farm's annual black tie gala. For Isoke, it represented a milestone, the first time Osas would stand before his peers, not just as a partner, but as a leader. She had already begun preparing, visiting a boutique that specialized in rich, structured silks that would celebrate her curves rather than hide them. She imagined herself in deep emerald, a color that made her ebony skin look like polished mahogany, standing by his side as the woman who had helped lay every stone of his foundation. But Osas had other plans. He entered the dressing room while she was pinned into a sample garment, a tailor cautiously measuring the sweep of her hips. He didn't look at the craftsmanship of the fabric or the way the color brought out the light in her eyes. He stood by the door, his arms crossed over a chest made hard by months of frantic gym sessions, his face set in a mask of cold, aesthetic judgment. "What is this, Isoke?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "It's for the gala next Friday," she said, trying to maintain her smile despite the prickle of pins and the sudden chill in the room. "The tailor says this silk is perfect for the silhouette we discussed." Osas walked over and pinched a fold of the emerald fabric between two fingers, his lip curling. "This isn't a silhouette, Isoke. It's a kent. You look like a mountain of fabric. Do you have any idea what the other wives are wearing? They are wearing designer pieces from Paris and Milan, sizes 0 and 2. They are wearing dresses that require discipline to fit into. You are trying to hide your lack of effort behind 300 yards of expensive silk." The tailor bowed his head, making himself invisible as he stepped away. Isoken felt the familiar hot sting of tears, but she blinked them back. "I am not hiding, Osas. I am dressing the body I have, a body that is healthy, strong, and too big for the image of this fam," he interrupted. He let go of the fabric as if it were contaminated. "I've made a decision. You aren't coming." The room went silent, save for the hum of the air conditioner. Isoken felt the floor tilt beneath her. "What do you mean I'm not coming? It's the annual gala. Everyone brings their spouse. Your CEO asked me about my spice business just last month." He was being polite, Isoke. Nobody at that level wants to hear about spices and market stalls. They want to discuss global markets, offshore accounts, and art. And they want to see a partner who has a wife that reflects his success, not his struggle. He stepped closer, his gaze sweeping over her with a clinical, detached cruelty. "Look at you. You don't have the right clothes because they don't make the right clothes for a woman who refuses to change. If I take you there, all they will see is where I came from. I am trying to show them where I am going. You are a walking reminder of a life I've outgrown." "I am your wife, Ososowe. I am the woman who ironed your shirts in a one-room apartment. I am the woman who wrote the strategy that got you that partnership. You didn't outgrow me. You are trying to erase the evidence of your own journey." "Call it what you want," he snapped, turning toward his own wardrobe, which was filled with suits that cost more than their old neighborhood's annual revenue. "The ticket has already been reassigned. I told the board you were unwell, suffering from a metabolic condition that requires rest. It's a kinder lie than the truth." "Who is taking my seat?" Isoke asked, though the answer was already a cold lump in her throat. "Esosa is coming as my corporate wellness consultant," he said, not even turning around. "She fits the brand. She knows how to move in those circles. She has the discipline to wear the clothes that represent modern elegance. She doesn't have to hide behind emerald tents." Isoke looked at her reflection in the full-length mirror. She saw the emerald silk, beautiful and vibrant, but she also saw the woman inside it, a woman who was being told she was too heavy for her own life. She saw the way Osas looked at his own reflection, admiring the sharp, lean lines of his body, a man who had successfully sculpted away every trace of the boy who once loved her abundance. "You are choosing a mirage over a mountain, Osas," she said, her voice regaining a gust of its old strength. "Esosa is a consultant of surfaces. I am the architect of your soul. When the lights go down at that gala and you're standing there with your wellness consultant, I want you to remember whose mind gave you the words you're speaking." "I'll remember to keep my silhouette sharp," he retorted, grabbing a tie and walking out. "That's what the world rewards, Isoke. Not sentiment, not mother wealth, just results." He left her standing there, pained into a dress for a party she was no longer invited to. The tailor returned, his eyes full of a pity that hurt more than Osas's anger. Slowly, one by one, he began to remove the pins. As the emerald silk fell away, Isoke felt as though her skin was being peeled off with it. She stayed in that dressing room long after the house grew quiet. She looked at the emerald fabric lying in a heap on the floor, a discarded dream. She realized then that the wardrobe war wasn't about fashion. It was the fact that Osas was ashamed of the very foundation that had allowed him to stand tall. He wanted a wife who looked like a trophy, someone light enough to carry without effort, someone who didn't remind him of the sweat, the grease, and the hunger of the bypass. As she stood there in her undergarments, feeling the cool air of the mansion against her plus-sized frame, she didn't feel small. She felt massive, too big, too real, and too honest for the glass house Osas had built. She realized that she didn't have the right clothes for his world because his world was too thin to hold a woman of her substance. The emerald silk remained on the floor, but inside her, a new, harder fabric was beginning to weave itself, one that wouldn't tear under the weight of a husband's shame.
The silence in the mansion had transitioned from the cool quiet of luxury to the suffocating stillness of a tomb. Even the humming of the high-end appliances felt like a judgmental buzz. Isoken sat at the breakfast island, her iPad open as she balanced the ledgers for her growing spice distribution business. She had just secured a contract with 3 more boutique hotels, a feat of logistics and negotiation that required her to be awake until 2 a.m. Yet, she had still risen at 5 a.m. to ensure the house was running perfectly. Osas walked into the kitchen, not with a greeting, but with a sharp, heavy exhale. He didn't look at the breakfast spread she had prepared, poached eggs and avocado on sourdough, exactly as his trainer had prescribed. Instead, his eyes fixed on the small bowl of oatmeal Isoken had poured for herself. Still eating for comfort, I see, his voice dripping with a casual, polished cruelty. He began to pour himself a glass of alkaline water, his movements practiced and rhythmic. Isoken didn't look up from her screen. It's fiber, Osas. I've been working since before dawn. I need the energy. Working? Osas scoffed, leaning against the marble counter, the slim fit fabric of his shirt straining against his sculpted chest. Moving jars of pepper and turmeric isn't work, Isoken. It's a hobby that keeps you busy so you don't have to face the truth. Real work requires discipline. It requires an elite mind. He tapped his temple. And a mind that cannot control the body it lives in is a lazy mind. Isoken finally paused, her finger hovering over his spreadsheet. A lazy mind? Osas, I am running this entire household. I manage the staff, the bills, the renovations you insisted on, and I am growing a business that is currently turning a higher profit margin than your firm's retail sector. My mind is far from lazy. And yet, Isoken said, stepping closer, his shadow falling over her ledgers, you are still that size. You see, Isoken, in the world I inhabit now, physical form is the ultimate resume. It tells the board that you have the willpower to say no. If you can't say no to a second helping or a bowl of carbs, how can I trust your judgment in anything else? Your body isn't a physical problem. It's a moral failing. It's a sign that you've given up. You've become soft. And in this world, soft things get crushed. The words felt like cold water being poured into her veins. Isoken looked at the man she had built with her own sacrifices. She saw the modern elegance he wore like armor, the sharp jawline, the flat stomach, the predatory stillness. He was using the language of success to erase her humanity, turning her body into a crime scene. You are gaslighting me, she said, her voice low and surprisingly steady. You are trying to make me believe that my value is tied to my dress size because it gives you an excuse to look elsewhere. You want to believe I'm lazy so you don't have to feel guilty about being ungrateful. Osas laughed, a short, hollow sound. Grateful? For what? For you staying exactly where we started while I outpaced you. You are projecting, Isoken. It's a common trait in people who lack self-control. You are trying to make me the villain because you are too weak to pick up a dumbbell. Esosa was right. Your spirit is as heavy as your frame. You are dragging me down with your lack of ambition for excellence. He reached over and closed her iPad with a sharp snap. Put the spice jazz away. Go to the gym. Prove to me that there's still a disciplined woman somewhere inside that abundance you are so proud of. Until then, don't talk to me about work. You aren't working, you are just existing. He walked out, leaving her in the shadow of his exit. Isoken sat frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. For a second, she looked at the oatmeal and felt a wave of nausea, wondering if he was right. Perhaps her success didn't count because it didn't come with a size 2 waistline. Perhaps her intelligence was shadowed by her curves. But then she looked at her hands. They were strong. They were the hands that had held his when he cried in Benin City. They were the hands that had calculated the risks he was too afraid to take. She realized that Osas wasn't trying to help her, he was trying to break her. He wanted her to believe she was a failure, so that when he finally walked away, he could tell himself he was just trimming the fat from his life. The gaslight had been lit, but as Isoken sat in the clinical perfection of her kitchen, she realized that the light it cast was ugly. It didn't show her flaws, it showed his. She pushed the bowl of oatmeal away, not because she was disciplined, but because the air in her own home had become too toxic to swallow. She wasn't lazy, she was exhausted. Exhausted from carrying a man who had become too light to have a soul. The house felt particularly cold that evening, a sterile museum of glass and resentment. Osas had stayed late at the office again, citing a high-priority merger, leaving Isoke in the oppressive silence of the living room. Seeking a distraction from the echoes of his earlier cruelty, she reached for the shared family tablet. Her intention was simple. She wanted to find the digital copies of their old house deeds to finalize a warehouse lease for her spice business. Because they had lived as one unit for so long, their digital lives were still tethered to a single cloud account, a relic of the days when they had no secrets. Isoke tapped on the recent uploads folder, expecting to see PDFs of contracts or perhaps photos of the new site Osas was supervising. Instead, the screen populated with a grid of images that made the air vanish from her lungs. The first photo was of a hotel balcony overlooking the ocean. It was sunset, the sky a bruised purple and gold. In the frame was Osas, his back to the camera, his arm draped around a woman. Even from behind, the silhouette was unmistakable. The narrow waist, the long, bone-straight hair, the sharp, model-esque posture. It was Esosa. Isoke's thumb hovered over the screen, trembling so violently she nearly dropped the device. She swiped to the next image. It was a selfie taken in a dim, high-end restaurant. Osas and Esosa were leaning into each other, their faces glowing with an intimacy that was never meant for public consumption. Osas was laughing, a real, unburdened laugh that Isoke hadn't seen in years. In his eyes was the hunger he used to have for their future, but it was now directed entirely at the woman who had pretended to be Isoke's wellness mentor. The grid continued, a digital diary of a double life. There were photos from the gym taken from angles that emphasized their matched physiques. There were messages screenshotted and saved, Esosa telling Osas he was too powerful to be held back by sentiment, and Osas responding that he felt light for the first time in a decade. But it was the most recent photo that broke the last of Isoke's resolve. It was a picture of a jewelry box, an open velvet case containing a diamond necklace that cost more than a year of Isoke's spice revenue. The caption Osas had typed underneath the photo read, "A gift for the woman who matches my silhouette. See you at the hotel." Isoke sat on the cold marble floor, the tablet glowing in the darkness like a radioactive coal. The modern elegance of her surroundings suddenly felt like a joke, a stage set for a play she had already been written out of. She looked at her own hands, the hands that had built the man in those photos. She realized now that every criticism of her weight, every lazy mind comment, and every wardrobe war was a strategic strike. He wasn't trying to help her. He was trying to justify his departure. He needed her to be the villain of the story so he could be the hero who chose excellence. The shared cloud, meant to be a repository of their joint history, had become the evidence of her erasure. She saw the metadata, the dates and times. He had been with Esosa on their anniversary. He had been with Esosa the day Isoke's father passed away, and he claimed he was too busy with a crisis at work to travel to Benin City with her. Every moment of gaslighting over the past few months replayed with the clarity of a high-definition nightmare. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't hormonal or insecure. She was being replaced by a woman who offered Osas the one thing Isoke's sacrifice couldn't give him, a mirror that did not remind him of where he had started. Isoke didn't scream. She didn't throw the tablet against the glass walls. A strange, icy calm began to settle over her, the kind of stillness that comes when a long, agonizing wait is finally over. She realized that the man in those photos, the one admiring the trophy best friend, was not the man she had loved. That man was dead, buried under layers of charcoal soot and ego. She began to select the photos, one by one. She didn't delete them. She sent them to her private email, her fingers moving with the precision of a woman who was no longer satisfied with her lot. She saved every screenshot, every sunset, and every diamond. As she finished, she heard the hum of Osas's car in the driveway. A few months ago, that sound would have made her heart lift. Now, it made her skin crawl. She placed the tablet back on the console table, exactly where she had found it. She stood up, smoothing her house dress over her plus-sized frame, feeling the weight of her body not as a failure, but as an anchor. Osas walked through the door, smelling of the same French cologne she had smelt on the balcony in the photo. He looked at her, his eyes immediately darting to her waist with that familiar look of clinical disappointment. "Why are the lights off?" he asked, his voice sharp. "You're sitting in the dark again, Isoke. It's depressing. It's that lack of energy I keep telling you about." Isoke looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't see a king. She saw a small, hollow man playing dress-up in a house built by a woman he wasn't strong enough to keep. "I was just looking at the cloud, Osasonwe," I said, my voice a calm, low vibration in the hallway. "It's amazing what you can find when you look into the sky." Osas froze for a fraction of a second, his hand pausing on his tie. The mask of modern elegance flickered for a moment, but only for a moment. He quickly recovered, his face hardening into a sneer. "I hope you found a workout plan, because from where I'm standing, you're still taking up far too much space." He walked past me, his shoulder brushing hers, a final physical dismissal. Isoke didn't flinch. She watched him walk towards the stairs, knowing that the shared part of their lives had just ended. The cloud had burst, and the rain was coming. The morning of their 10th wedding anniversary arrived not with the sunlight of a new decade, but with the cold, sterile hum of the mansion's climate control. Isoke woke early, her heart beating a tentative rhythm of hope that she tried and failed to suppress. 10 years. They had survived hunger, the dust of the bypass, and the crushing weight of other people's low expectations. She remembered the day they wed. Her dress had been simple lace, and Osas's suit was 3 sizes too big, borrowed from an uncle. They had eaten rice from plastic bowls and promised that once they had enough, they would celebrate every year as if it were their first. She dressed with a quiet, trembling care. She chose a soft cream-colored silk that draped over her curves like a liquid prayer, and she spent an hour massaging her skin with the vanilla-scented oils Osas used to love. She descended the marble staircase, the scent of the anniversary breakfast she had prepared, the special Benin delicacies that were the foundation of their early love, drifting through the hollow hallways. Osas was already in the foyer. He wasn't wearing a robe or a casual shirt. He was in a tactical style designer tracksuit, his bags already packed and standing by the obsidian console table. He was checking his watch, his face a mask of high-octane focus. "Osasunwen," she said softly, her voice catching on the name. "You're up early. I've made the breakfast we talked about, the one from the first year." He didn't look at her. He was busy responding to a flurry of pings on his phone. "I don't have time for heavy breakfast, Isoken. I told you I'm on a strict schedule. I'm heading out." Isoken felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at the calendar on the wall, the dates circled in the gold ink she had marked their milestones. "Heading out? Osas, it's today. It's our 10th anniversary." Osas finally looked up, but there was no recognition in his eyes, no flicker of the boy who had once cried in her arms. Instead, there was an impatient flick of his brow. "Is it? I hadn't noticed. My mind is on actual priorities, Isoken. The firm has organized a high-level executive retreat, a performance and synergy weekend, in a private resort. It's mandatory for the senior partners." "A retreat?" she whispered. "On our 10th anniversary? Did you tell them? Did you tell them we had plans?" "Plans?" he scoffed, grabbing his leather weekend bag. "What plans, Isoken? To sit here and eat palm oil while you remind me of how poor we used to be? I am moving at the speed of light, and you are trying to anchor me to a calendar from a life I have already finished. This retreat is about the future. It's about being around people who push me to be sharper, leaner, and more elite." As he spoke, a sleek white SUV pulled into the driveway. Through the glass doors, Isoken saw Esosa, her hair pulled back into a fierce high ponytail, her eyes shielded by oversized designer sunglasses. She waved a manicured hand, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. "Is that the executive retreat?" Isoken asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy level. "Your wellness consultant is going on a mandatory partner retreat?" Esosa didn't flinch. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. Esosa is facilitating the fitness and mindfulness modules. She is essential to the program. Unlike you, she understands that success requires a total overhaul of the self. She doesn't just celebrate the past, she engineers the future. He stepped toward the door, then paused, looking back at Isoken with a look of profound clinical pity. "You should use this weekend to reflect, Isoken. Look at yourself in these big mirrors and ask why you're so desperate to cling to a date. Maybe if you spent more time on your silhouette and less on your sentimentalities, I wouldn't feel so suffocated every time I walk through this door." "You are leaving your wife on your 10th anniversary to go to a hotel with her best friend," she said, the words falling like stones into a well. "I am going to walk," he snapped, his voice echoing in the vast empty foyer. "Enjoy your breakfast, Isoken. Though, looking at you, I'd say you've enjoyed enough breakfast for a lifetime." The door clicked shut behind him with a sound as final as a gunshot. Isoken stood in the center of the modern elegance she had helped fund, her cream silk dress feeling like a shroud. She watched through the window as the SUV sped away, the tires kicking up the expensive gravel of their driveway. She saw Osas lean toward Esosa, his hand reaching out to touch her shoulder in a gesture of easy public intimacy he had denied Isoken for years. She walked back into the kitchen. The food was still steaming, the aromas of ginger, peppers, and slow-cooked tradition filling the room. It was a meal for a king, but she realized now that she had been serving a ghost. She didn't cry. The tears had been burned out of her by the coldness of his exit. Instead, she sat at the head of the long marble dining table. She picked up a fork and took a bite of the food she had prepared with so much love. It tasted like ash. She looked at her wedding ring, the simple gold band that had grown tight on her finger over the years. It represented 10 years of walking in the sun, 10 years of ghostwriting his success, 10 years of being the ground he walked on. And he had traded it all for a weekend of synergy with a woman who only loved his reflection. Isoken stood up, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't clear the table. She left the food to grow cold, a monument to a dead marriage. She walked upstairs to Osas's office, the room where she had spent countless nights making him look brilliant. She sat in his expensive leather chair and opened his laptop. She didn't need to hack it. She knew his passwords, the ones he never bothered to change, because she thought she was too lazy to be a threat. She began to look at the bank statements, the hidden accounts, and the transfers to Esosa's wellness brand. She saw the divorce folder he had started 3 months ago, tucked inside a file labeled Corporate Restructuring. The rejection of the anniversary wasn't a mistake. It was a declaration. He was done with her. He was waiting for the right moment to discard her like a piece of worn-out machinery. Isoken stood up, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't pack her wrappers, not her spices, but the evidence of her mind. The anniversary was over, but the reckoning had just begun. Osas returned to the mansion on a Tuesday evening, the air thick with the impending rains that always seemed to mirror the turbulence of his life. He didn't enter like a man returning to a sanctuary. He entered like an auditor, his movements crisp, his face set in a mask of professional finality. He had spent the weekend in the company of Esosa and the firm's elite, basking in the glow of a world that valued the sharpness of a silhouette over the depth of a history. In that air-conditioned bubble, the memory of Isoke, the soft curves of her body, the smell of her spices, the weight of her 10-year sacrifice had felt like a distant, embarrassing dream. He found her in the living room, sitting on one of the white leather armchairs that he had chosen specifically to make her feel out of place. She wasn't cooking. She wasn't cleaning. She was simply sitting, her hands resting on her lap, watching the light fade over the pool. She was wearing a simple dark wrapper, her skin looking like deep, unpolished mahogany in the twilight. Osas didn't sit down. He stood in the center of the room, reaching into his slim Italian leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick envelope, the logo of a high-end family law firm embossed in the corner. He tossed it onto the glass coffee table between them. The sound of the paper hitting the glass was sharp, like the crack of a bone. "It's time, Isoke," he said, his voice a cold, practiced baritone. "I've been doing a lot of thinking over the weekend about the firm, about my trajectory, and about the man I've become. And the conclusion is unavoidable." Isoken didn't reach for the envelope. She didn't even blink. She kept her gaze on him, her eyes calm and unreadable. "And what is that conclusion, Osasomeone?" "We are no longer on the same level," he said, the words coming out with a clinical detachment that he had perfected in boardroom negotiations. "Success isn't just about money, Isoke. It's about a shared frequency. It's about an aesthetic and psychological alignment. I am moving toward a global stage, a world of modern elegance and peak performance. And you are rooted in the bypass. You are rooted in the struggle." He began to pace the room, his shadow stretching long and thin across the marble. "I look at you and I see a ghost of who I used to be. I see the hunger, the grease, the weight of a life that I've worked my fingers to the bone to escape. Every time I walk into this house, I feel like I'm being dragged back into the mud. You refuse to change. You refuse to refine yourself. You cling to your size and your spices like they are badges of honor. But to me, they are anchors." He stopped and looked at her, his eyes scanning her plus-sized frame with a look of profound aesthetic disgust. "I need a partner who reflects where I am going, not where I started. I need someone who understands that a man of my status deserves a certain kind of presence beside him.
You aren't that presence, Isoken. You're a liability to my brand. These papers, they are a mercy. They give you the chance to go back to the world you're comfortable in, and they give me the space to breathe. Isoken finally looked down at the envelope. She reached out and touched the edge of the paper, her fingers steady. A shared frequency, she whispered, a small sad smile playing on her lips. Is that what you call it when you forget the woman who ghostwrote the very mind you are so proud of? You say I am rooted in the struggle, Osas, but you forget that the struggle was the foundation. You are trying to live in a penthouse without acknowledging the bricks in the basement. The bricks are replaceable, Osas snapped, his composure finally fraying. I am the one standing here now. I am the partner. I am the one the world sees. Your sacrifice was a transaction, and consider yourself paid in full with the life I've given you here. But the contract is over. You don't fit the silhouette of my future. He checked his watch, the diamond face catching the dying light. I've already made arrangements. The house is mine. It's a corporate asset under my name. You have 48 hours to pack your things. I've included a settlement that is more than fair for someone of your modest requirements. I suggest you take it and go back to Benin City. Start a little shop. Live the life you are actually suited for. He turned to leave but stopped at the door, his hand on the handle. And Isoken, don't make this ugly. No shouting, no scenes. Let's end this with the refinement I've worked so hard to establish in this home. He walked out, the sound of his footsteps echoing with a hollow, expensive thud. Isoken sat in the darkened room for a long time. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She picked up the envelope and read it. She read the words, irreconcilable differences, asset distribution, spousal support. She realized then that Osas truly believed his own lie. He believed he had outpaced her. He believed that by trimming his waistline and polishing his accent, he had become a different species. He saw her abundance as a lack of discipline, never realizing that it was her abundance that had filled his empty cup for 10 years. She stood up, her body feeling massive and powerful in the quiet house. She walked to the kitchen and looked at the marble counters, the high-end stove she was no longer refined enough to use. She reached into the pantry and pulled out a small jar of her signature spice blend, the deep red pepper and the golden turmeric. She opened it and inhaled. It smelled of sun, of earth, and of a woman who was satisfied with her lot. Osas wanted a different level. She would show him that there are levels he hasn't even begun to imagine. He thought he was trimming the fat, but he was actually cutting out his own heart. Isoken didn't pack her wrappers. She didn't pack the jewelry he had bought her as image upgrades. She went to the office and took the hard drives, the notebooks, and the original blueprints of the strategies she had built for him. She took the mind that he claimed was lazy. As she walked toward the door, leaving the divorce papers on the glass table, she looked at the mansion one last time. It was a beautiful glass cage, and as she stepped out into the warm, humid night, Isoken felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt light. Not the fragile, aesthetic lightness Osas craved, but the soaring lightness of a woman who had finally dropped a heavy, ungrateful burden. Osas thought he was serving her an ending. He didn't realize he had just handed her a ticket to her own empire.